Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Gig Harbor City Council study session of Thursday, December 22nd, 2022. The time is 3:03 p.m. and I will do a roll call. Councilmember Wook.
Here.
Councilmember Rodenberg.
Here.
Councilmember Henderson.
Here.
Councilmember Likens.
Here.
Councilmember Barber.
Here.
Councilmember Storsett.
Here.
And Councilmember Denson is excused today. So we'll go right into our first discussion item. Welcome Dean Zavak and welcome Jeff Langhelm with us today. And the report will come, this is the Stormwater Management and Site Development Manual update. And this will be Director Jeff Langhelm with this presentation. And
Thank
Dean
you.
to support.
Yes. Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, Council. Some of you might have already met Dean Savak, our new senior engineer. He comes to us with a lot of expertise. Kitsap County Stormwater, knows design and stormwater manual very well. He's going to be, I'm handing off the presentation to him, but you will also see on the screen Josh Gilchrist from 3J Consulting. Josh, some of you might also remember, he was an associate engineer. He knows our stormwater manual very well because he used to implement it for us. So Josh and his company are helping Dean with the update. And so with that, I'll hand it off to Dean.
Okay, super glad to be here. This is pretty simple. The city has to maintain an NPDES stormwater discharge permit. We have a new permit that was implemented in 2019. And one of the requirements is that we had to update our stormwater manual to meet the current permit requirements. There's a few changes. We were supposed to adopt our manual by June 30th, 2022. We didn't make that deadline, so it did invoke a G20, which is a non-compliance with ecology. I think Bree made the commitment to ecology. We would have the new manual adopted by March 1st. Ecology asked us why we didn't just adopt the Pierce County manual. And one of the reasons is that we have just a few things that we do differently at Gig Harbor. One of them is direct discharge. The city does not, there's an ordinance in place that doesn't allow direct discharge of stormwater for flow control exemption unless you're abut Puget Sound. So the Pierce County manual does allow direct discharge. So that's one of the things we had to change. There's also a few other changes. We'd like to make the manual our own by remove all Pierce County text references in our manual and change them to Gig Harbor. We want to make sure it references all Gig Harbor municipal code and not Pierce County code. And then we also, in the Pierce County, they provide stormwater standard details, but they say Pierce County on them. And so we've been doing previously is we have our own, we make it our own. It says Gig Harbor, stormwater detail. And it's so far previously, it's been signed by the city engineer with the date. So those are some of the things we want to change. Manual. And then there was one other thing there. It has to do with getting flow control credit for when you're doing your stormwater detention analysis. It has to do with retained trees. Previously, the city has not adopted that part of the manual just because it kind of conflicts with the planning code for the setback requirements. And also, since it's only used for stormwater flow control calculations, it really doesn't need to be in our manual. Personally, I've never seen any engineer submit these calcs. So I think it's something that is just best left removed from our manuals, just so it doesn't provide a confusion or provides two different conflicting setback requirements. So that's about it. We're well on our way. Josh, 3G and his partners, they've been updating the manual. We're at 90% level now. We have volume 1 through 6 up on our Bluebeam for internal review, and anybody else can make comments on it. And then part of this process is that we need to adopt a new ordinance that makes this manual current and it removes the previous 2016.
Councilmember Henderson?
Yeah, was Dean finished?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I had a couple questions, comments. Thank you for your responses back today, Dean. Those were helpful. But I think for some folks here, direct discharge exemptions, if you were to look at that and you didn't know what that meant, you may think it's okay just to directly discharge into Puget Sound. My understanding is the direct discharge refers to direct discharge into the city storm drain system, right?
That's true. In the manual, it means that it's a flow control exemption, which means you don't have to meet like stream protection standards. So any storm system that outfalls directly in marine waters is usually exempt from having to meet the stream protection standards. Since pretty much all our storm water systems directly discharge to marine, that makes pretty much all our MS4 direct discharge. Like a lot of municipalities actually discharge into creeks.
Okay, but there was an exemption in there for properties that abut Puget Sound.
Yes.
And so the exemption would allow those properties to directly discharge into Puget Sound or directly discharge into the city stormwater system?
Dean, I can offer a little bit of feedback here, if that's okay. So direct discharge would refer to circumventing the flow control or the water quality requirements that come with the manual, and properties that are directly abutting the sound don't have the ability to run the pipes underground and get them back to where you can complete treatment or flow control of any kind prior to the water running off into the harbor. So in this situation, the exemption, it makes it a little bit more stringent for applicants or designs than it would have been previously. So the city of Gig Harbor, all of you adopted an ordinance that removed the ability for properties upstream to use this portion of the code and direct discharge, and therefore avoid or circumvent water quality, which is not as desirable as treating the stormwater prior to it entering the Puget Sound. So in this case, the change makes the code slightly more stringent, but that was the same code that was enforced during 2016. I believe, Jeff, that was 2020, December 2020 ordinance.
Okay, good. That's helpful, that knowing it's a little bit stricter. I think stormwater is going to be looked at a lot closer in the coming years as far as what that contributes to the contamination of Puget Sound and other bodies of water. And then the removing flow control credits for stormwater modeling regarding tree preservation. Dean, you mentioned that you'd never seen that used. Why wouldn't a developer use that? Because they would have a smaller flow control, which for most people that would be a retention type pond, right? And that's generally what we think of as.
Yeah, I think that you can also model the retained trees as forests, which I think actually gives you a better flow control credit. So what they're offering, the flow control credit, is really not, it's not to their advantage. If it was to their advantage, for sure they'd be trying to use it. So.
Okay, so removing this from our code is not going to incentivize loss of more trees in a development.
Nope, not at all. This is the only way they could possibly use this is just for running their stormwater hydraulic modeling.
Okay. Okay, cool, thanks.
Just a reminder, I'm not sure how much detail we want to get into here, but the state has its own stormwater manual, and we can either, options are adopt their manual, which I think is a 2019 manual, or we can adopt an technically equivalent manual, which Pierce County's is technically equivalent, or we can come up with our own manual. What we're doing as part of this process is we are adopting Pierce County's manual, which is technically equivalent, and just putting our name on it to, like Dean was saying, so that it can reference our codes and our standards and our references. What we cannot do is we cannot make our manual less restrictive than the state's manual or Pierce County's manual. We can make it more restrictive, which is what we have done in some of these examples that Dean's talked about. So so there's nothing we can do to back away from requirements. We can only make them more restrictive.
Thank you. Councilmember Wook?
Yes, thank you. We received an email from Mr. Jerry Gamble talking about noxious weeds. Does this pertain to what we're talking about here? And does it actually fit into volume 1, chapter 29, I think, for the bioretention cells, swells, and planter boxes, noxious weeds area? And that is this a place to talk about that?
Yes and no. There are maintenance requirements for, stormwater facilities, which are ponds or swales, stuff like that. But in order for it to be, this maintenance manual is written, so if your project actually triggered all the minimum requirements, 1 through 10, which in order to do that, this project would have to create more than 5,000 square feet of new hard surfaces. Then this would be applicable to their storm system, but only in the areas of that site that are cleared. So Jerry's comments were there were good comments in the fact that, that is kind of already part of the maintenance for noxious weeds, whether how we describe which noxious weeds, maybe I wasn't quite sure what his question was, but we can't make this apply to all properties, only properties that have to have their own stormwater maintenance under, site development.
I think one of his comments has to do with the village side at Harbor Hill North. Does this apply to that? He's our Scotch broom warrior and doing his best to keep noxious weeds out of this community. So is there anything in this that would apply to make sure that Scotch broom stays out of the village and Gig Harbor North?
I don't think so. Only if they have a stormwater facility and only in the actual facility itself. There is a Gig Harbor Municipal Code. I think it's 8.04 for plat nuisance that's already in effect. That should pertain to lots that didn't have stormwater facilities on them.
And so, yeah, so we have talked about Jerry's email and we feel that 804 takes care of what Jerry's looking for. And this stormwater manual only encompasses the stormwater facilities, not just generally undeveloped or developed land. So it's not appropriate to change our stormwater manual because we already have in there, as Dean was saying, regulations related to noxious weeds in stormwater facilities. But that's the extent of it. That's all we can manage with this.
Okay, has anybody gotten back to Jerry to let him know?
We were going to be doing that after this meeting. I wasn't sure if Jerry was going to attend, but yes, we'll close the loop with Jerry.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yes, so some of the problem with this is there'd be no way to enforce it on lots that didn't have a stormwater facility on them. So.
Councilmember Wook, I would note that what Jerry Gamble was speaking about, the permit that he was talking about was the Village at Harbor Hill Development Agreement. And so in that development agreement, we were able to state that the property owner was responsible for removing all noxious weeds. And so outside of that agreement, the Chapter 8 code that Jeff and Dean have described are our method for ensuring noxious weed removal. And I would say to contact Officer Code Enforcement, Officer Blodgett with any noxious weeds concerns.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from council?
I'll
Okay,
just make a final statement. So we have to go through SEPA. So Dean and Josh have submitted SEPA applications. So we're going through that process. And as Dean noted, we're going to be coming to council in February, looking for a first reading of an ordinance and a second reading of an ordinance for adopting our new stormwater manual, with our goal of having second reading at the last council meeting in February.
Okay, great.
So I may add that once we adopt this ordinance, that's pretty much our vesting date, where any future development would have to follow the new manual versus being vested under the old one.
Okay. Thank you, Dean, and thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Josh, for joining us this afternoon. Really appreciate you all being here and giving us this update. Is there anything further from council? Councilmember Barber?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I would like us to spend a few minutes tonight discussing our commission appointment process. As everyone knows, we've been tweaking it. We knew we could make some changes until we got it right. And just to review, we changed our process for legal reasons to provide for mayoral appointment and still providing for input from us. We also changed the application so we would receive more detail about each applicant than we previously received. And after 2 appointments, I feel very strongly that it's time to revisit that process, especially after our last meeting. I don't believe the process is the type of process through which we should be putting our volunteers. I'm not proud of the introduction to city government that we are currently offering. It has been, in fact, a bit humiliating for the applicants. And I've heard from several members of our community indicating that this process is a detriment to future applications, which is the last thing that we want. I'd like us to ask staff to revise the process, removing the introduction to council while retaining our review of applications prior to the mayor's interviews. As part of the process, I'd like to ask that the clerk send us applications 5 business days ahead of any interviews that the mayor and staff will have with applicants, so we can provide our feedback. And that the process also include communication and consultation with the current applicable commission chair. So I just bring that tonight because I wanted to do it as quickly as we could, because there has been so much conversation in the community about it. I wanted us to be as responsive as possible. So I offer that to you for consideration and discussion.
Thank you, Councilmember Barber. Any council members wish to discuss this item? Or have comments? Councilmember Likens?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So I'm wondering, since we're all kind of sitting here taking this in, maybe we could have Josh kind of just send us or review what the process is now, what the proposed changes are for feedback, and that maybe after the holidays, we come back and discuss this. I'm just trying to think of with Christmas coming up, like how we would move forward with this. I also, and I had shared this with Katrina earlier, had gotten some feedback that some people were uncomfortable with our last meeting, and about what we expect of our boards and commissions, and that I think the welcoming and the standards that we set for people are important, and that you know, we want to have clear standards so that people understand. And you know, I don't want us to have more stringent standards for person on board and commission than we do for being on council. So that's just my thoughts, but I'd like to hear from others too. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Wook?
Yes, thank you. Until we changed this process this year, we had lots of applicants for our boards and commissions. Don't know what that difference was and why people stopped applying, but you know, I've been on the council for 4 years and we had lots of applicants and we've had really, really good attendance at our boards and commissions with people who wanted to serve on these boards and commissions. So I'm happy to continue this conversation as we go forward, but you know, it had been working until we changed it this year. So thank you. That's all.
Thank you. So Councilmember Likens, I know you had asked Josh for some information. Are you wanting to have that now, or are we wanting to table this
I don't-
till after the first of the year? What questions specifically do you have for Josh for this conversation?
I think I heard, Mary, it sounds like you had a list and kind of a proposal. You know, maybe the two of you get together and look at what changes and then send it out to council for feedback. But I certainly think after the first of the year is fine. I'm curious, Katrina, I know you and I had a brief conversation about this, how staff and then how you, Mayor, also feel about this and how it's going. I mean, if you're comfortable, you know, sharing what you think is working and what's not working. But I'm not in any rush, and we don't have to do this today.
I would defer that to Josh. I would say that staff, we don't have an opinion of the process per se. But we have heard feedback that a little intimidating coming before all 7 of you. So, you know, I throw that out. And then obviously I've heard from 2 or 3 council members that were not satisfied with the last meeting and how that interview of the Parks Commission candidate went.
Okay.
Councilmember Rodenberg?
I agree with the council member Lycan that this is too important just to make any decisions now without the information. And I agree that maybe I hate to have Josh do more work, but since he did so much to begin with, but I understood the new process. There was some legalities involved, but you know, I've heard 3 people just now say that they've heard from someone. And I think we ought to quit dancing around the issue. And if there's something there, let's hear it. I haven't heard it. I'd love to hear it. I probably might agree, but it isn't fair for a couple people to have the information and some not. So I'd be interested in anybody sharing anything they had or what they heard with me to better help me make a decision when we get around to doing it.
Thank you. Josh?
Yeah, I think I can weigh in with a couple of points that might help clarify things. The interview process and the selection process is an appointment process, and it's the mayor's process. And she has worked with Katrina and myself, and we've developed some guidelines for how we make those appointments, how the mayor will make those appointments. But those are not council decisions. So whether or not the chair is involved or who's on the interview committees, or even if interviews are actually done, those are the mayor's discretion as an appointing authority. So we've come to council and said, this is what we plan to do. And we've shared that with you and we want your feedback on that, but it's not a council decision on how that's done. Now, when Daniel spoke to us about this a couple of months ago, he brought up the point that you are the appointing authority. So you confirm the appointments. I'm sorry, you're the confirming authority. So you have the authority to confirm those appointments, and whatever information you need to make that confirmation, that is a decision you can make. So the one step that we took with our last council rules update was that we included the caveat that we'll bring everyone to a study session for a brief introduction before we make the appointment. That is up to you whether or not you want to do that process or not. If you need that step to make your appointment, you can have us do that. If you feel like that's not necessary or not working, we can remove that step. But what the mayor has told you in the past is that she will let you know who's applied. She will give you an opportunity to provide feedback on those applications. And then she will let you know before she informs the applicant who she intends to appoint and give you another opportunity to provide feedback on that as well. So basically you have 3 bites at the apple. You have the applications that once they're received, you have the mayor's notification before she informs the applicant that they're going to be appointed. And you also have the interview at the study session. So those three things are those are the things where we can have discussion about what you want to see changed. But the actual interview process and the selection process, that's really the mayor's authority, and it's really up to the mayor, each individual mayor, how they want to do that.
And Josh, the fourth bite at the apple, so to speak, would be the application or the appointment on consent. to the
Yes, on the
council.
consent agenda, yeah.
Who came first? Councilmember Likens.
Yes, I was just going to add that maybe we just want to look at the interview at the council study session as possible alternatives to that. And then as to Lee's question, I just heard feedback that some community members felt we were being disrespectful to the candidates, questioning, you know, how long they had lived, maybe saying they needed to live here longer, and that it was an uncomfortable process being on video with all of us. They felt a little bit vulnerable, and it was from a couple people in the community. I know I shared that with Katrina. I shared it with someone who had said something that they found might have had just not welcoming undertones individually. But I don't know of the other instances that Katrina is mentioning. So thanks.
Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mayor. So the whole process that we sat through during the last study session was supposed to be an introduction, right? Not an interview. I mean, the interviews had been conducted by the mayor, and it was an introduction. So I guess what maybe we need to do is set some ground rules on, if we're going to be keeping this process, what an introduction really is. If it's another interview level, then I can see it's rather intimidating to be sitting there in front of 7 people being grilled on things that the mayor's already gone over, perhaps, or isn't an issue for the mayor, and it is the mayor's overall process. So I think it would be good. I myself was not particularly comfortable with a lot of the questioning, just because I thought he was being introduced to us and that was it. Learn a little bit more about him and leave it at that. And I guess if we had other serious concerns, we could have brought them up to the mayor after that meeting. But I don't think that was I certainly wouldn't want the introductions to be turned into interviews, because I think that's the wrong place. And the candidate was probably said, hey, you're going to be introduced to the city council, and may not have been ready for a lot of questions. So.
Thank you. Councilmember Barber.
Yes, I just wanted to add that the residents who I heard from I had somebody tell me that there would be, based on what happened at that meeting, that there was no way that they would ever apply for a position with the city as a volunteer, because they felt like it was so humiliating and degrading to a volunteer. I had one person specifically say that to me. The other people basically just felt very uncomfortable. They were people who were watching the study session the other night and just felt really uncomfortable for him. And so my thought is that hearing Josh and understanding that the differences really too, I guess it's the introduction that I want us to look at, and either we figure out a way to restructure it, or maybe that's something that we don't need. And I guess personally, I feel like if I read the application and I had a question for the person, I could call them directly, and I don't know that they need to be introduced to the 7 of us as a panel. But I think it's the introduction call that is what I would seriously like us to look at changing.
Thank you. Councilmember Rodenberg. Oh, you're on mute.
I think the introduction of that particular individual, it was more of when I get introduced to somebody, or when someone is being introduced to a panel, generally a chair will say, this is so-and-so, he lives in Gig Harbor, he's got 16 children, he had a former life as a airline pilot, that's an introduction. But when you ask somebody to introduce themselves, then it becomes, it leans towards the interview process. So I think maybe the introduction should be more of an introduction. And if I'm not mistaken, by that time, the decision is already made. So no reason for any interview type questions, in my opinion.
Thank you, Councilmember Wood.
Thank you. If I'm going to confirm someone and someone offers me the opportunity to ask questions, I'm going to do so because it's my job to confirm. And I need to know information in order to confirm. It is a transparent process. And if we are confirming, then I have to have information by which I can confirm an appointment. I just don't confirm rubber stamp things for no reason at all. So however we go forward with this, I hope we'll take that into consideration at some point. Thank you.
Councilmember Likens.
Yes, thank you. I'm just wondering that instead of, like we were talking about, the introduction with all 7 people in a recorded meeting, that, for example, if I know someone is applying for Parks Commission and I know they want to put a Ferris wheel downtown and I have concerns about that, maybe negotiating some type of ability for me to one-on-one have questions with that person about that specific thing that maybe I heard. And that if I still have concerns, I believe I can still pull them off of the consent agenda and state my concerns and why I'm not supporting them. So there is that ability to ask questions. I'm just wondering if in a study session is the best place. Thank you.
Councilmember Rodenberg.
Yeah, I think that if it's the mayor doing the interviewing, and in council member Likens' example, she heard that this person wanted to put a Ferris wheel downtown. Well, she's got plenty of time to talk to the mayor and say, Mayor, I understand this person wants to put a Ferris wheel downtown. Can you find out about that for me? And that would keep the interview process in the mayor's hands, and it wouldn't involve us in the interview process. So we have that. I think the second bite of the apple was that we get a chance to give our questions or concerns to the mayor, and that's what we should do. And then it would be good if she could get back to us and say, yeah, he wants to put a Ferris wheel downtown, but it's only going to, hold 20 people or something, just she could, but it would leave the interview process in the mayor's hands, as I think it should be. And I think as the law says it should be.
Thank you. I appreciate all of your feedback very much. Thank you, Councilmember Barber, for bringing this to our attention. I think the process can definitely be talked about again and tweaked to be less uncomfortable for the candidate, for sure, but also for me, for the council, that we don't have, it was awkward to have some questions that were not expected to come to that person. That person definitely did not expect that, nor did I. And I would have liked the opportunity to have talked with council members about specific questions like that ahead of time, so that I could have said, I already asked about that. Here's the story, without having to embarrass that person. And so I do think the process needs some tweaking for sure. And so I appreciate you guys bringing this forward. And so after the first of the year, I don't know that we need a whole nother study session on this because we've gone over this a lot of times, but as we said, we'll talk with Josh and Katrina and put something together, send it to council for feedback and kind of start there. We'll start there and go from there, if that sounds okay to everybody. Okay. I'm seeing majority of heads nodding, so that's great. Okay, so if there is nothing else from council, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
And have a happy holiday.
And I
Yes,
hope everyone has a very Merry Christmas.
yes. Everybody enjoy yourselves and your families. Get some rest. We'll see you in the first of the year. Merry Christmas.
Great.
Bye,
Stay
everybody.
warm, stay warm.
Bye, everyone.